Mr. Gaston Alfonso Browne entered the political arena in 1999. He was elected to Parliament for the St. John's West constituency. After 10 years in opposition, he led the ABLP, the Antigua and Barbuda Labour Party, to victory in the 2014 general election. The ABLP won 14 of the 17 seats. He led the ABLP to a second consecutive election victory in March 2018. Mr. Browne was educated at City Banking College in the UK, where he gained a Bachelor of Science in Banking and Finance. He later went on to the University of Manchester, where he gained an MBA in Finance. He served as a senior bank manager with the Swiss American Banking Group and has also served as director of several companies, including Liat 1974 Limited. Ladies and gentlemen, students everywhere, I'm pleased to present tonight's guest on GBN's Beyond the Headlines, the Antigua and Barbuda Prime Minister, the Honorable Gaston Alfonso Browne. And I'm pleased to be with you this evening, and we say welcome and good evening to Antigua's Prime Minister, Gaston Alfonso Browne. Prime Minister Browne, it's great to have you with us this evening.
Yes, certainly a pleasure. Good evening to all of your listeners and certainly your viewers, both in traditional media and new media.
So, Mr. Prime Minister, you dwell in Antigua, but you've been making a lot of headlines in Grenada over the last 6 weeks. And the headlines that you have been making relate to COVID-19, which is a very topical issue in the world these days, has been since March 2020. Let's get a situation analysis. As far as Antigua and Barbuda is concerned, how is your government managing the COVID-19 crisis?
Well, we're struggling. I mean, as you know, COVID has decimated economies in the Caribbean, and we're now experiencing a third wave of COVID deaths. We didn't do too badly initially. I think the first wave we had about 5 deaths, and then the second wave there were 38 deaths. And since then we have had about another 50 deaths. So a total of 93. That's 93 individuals too many. But again, there are other countries within the region who are also struggling with hospitalizations and deaths. So our push now is to try and achieve national immunity as soon as possible in order to reduce the hospitalizations and deaths. But COVID has been a significant challenge for all of us. And you'll be aware that we have been working together. We have actually, pooled our resources through the Caribbean Public Health Agency, CARPHA. And I would say that initially, we had a significant amount of success, but this Delta strain has proven to be quite a challenge for all of us. And we actually seen an increase in the amount of deaths within the region for the last, I'd say, 30 to 60 days. So, we have to redouble our efforts.
Redoubling of efforts. So what has it been like for your healthcare team, considering you're on your third wave? Because Grenada's first wave has just come and it has been so stressful on the country. So would you like to help us through this? What was it like your first and your second? I know you're on your third wave.
Right. And, our healthcare workers, they're strained. They have had to treat COVID patients for the last 19 months. And one of the problems that we have within the OACS sub-region is that, we don't have a lot of healthcare personnel. In fact, generally speaking, our healthcare services and personnel have been actually supplemented with Cuban nurses. But even Cuba itself is stretched in terms of providing nurses to the region. So you'll find that that is a problem. We have been building out our healthcare facilities, expanding our healthcare facilities rapidly. In fact, we just added a 75-bed hospital facility. But unfortunately, one of the problems that we're experiencing, which is similar to the challenges in other OACS countries, is that we don't have enough healthcare personnel to man the new facility. So now we're now seeking to import nurses, possibly from India. We have approached the government of India to assist us in getting some nurses here. We're even looking within the diaspora to try and attract Antiguans in the diaspora. who have nursing experience and who are available to return here even temporarily. And we also employ retired nurses. So we have a problem in terms of, limited human resources. And again, we had spent an enormous amount of resources adding additional healthcare facilities. We established an IDC center, that is an infectious disease center, the additional 75-bed hospital, as I indicated. In fact, we have now about 3 beds per 1,000 of population. So whereas we have the physical infrastructure in place, we do have a shortage of personnel. In fact, part of that health infrastructure include a number of polyclinics, 2 of which were recently constructed, and these are like mini hospitals. But again, goes back to the issue of a shortage of human resources.
So in one of your inserts recently, you were speaking about the fact that your health facilities are full. We heard about Mount St. John, and there's another.
Right. So Mount St. John, the services there are stretched, but, they've been coping. As I said earlier, we have this 75-bed facility, which will capture the overflow from Mount St. John, and that's the principal hospital in the island, the main hospital facility. But again, the problem that we're having, is finding sufficient human resources in order to man that facility. So to date, we have not utilized it, but it's there already equipped to assist us in addressing any overflow from Mount St. John.
And as we move on, one of the biggest challenges that has been faced across the Caribbean region and globally, if we might say, has to do with, people use the word hesitancy, vaccine hesitancy, but no, some people say just a slow rate of vaccination. How much of a challenge is that in Antigua?
Well, as you said, it's a global challenge. It seems to be a little more acute within the Caribbean region. And it's very unfortunate because we have perhaps the highest percentage per capita of living sicks in the world. We have one of the highest prevalence of NCDs in the world. It means, therefore, that our people, they have greater health vulnerabilities than the average individual globally, which would have necessitated people getting vaccinated as soon as possible in order to protect themselves. But unfortunately, we have a significant amount of hesitancy. In fact, I'll go as far as stating it's perhaps more like, vaccine resistance. So our problem is a little more acute than hesitancy. It also borders on, a form of resistance in which a lot of individuals, a large cadre of individuals, they're resisting getting vaccinated. But by having a large cadre of our populations unvaccinated, that is fertile ground for the virus to continue to spread and obviously to mutate. And we all know that these mutations or variants, they create even greater problems than the original strains. And that is why, globally, we're pushing to get our people vaccinated to achieve national immunity as soon as possible in order to prevent future variants, which may prove to be more deadly, even more deadly than the Delta variant, which has caused us so much problems within the last couple of months.
But Prime Minister, why do you think we face this problem? Some people are saying hesitance, you're saying resistance. What went wrong? Why haven't we been able to overcome this challenge? Well,
it's probably cultural. A lot of it too has to do with the messaging from the anti-vaxxers, and perhaps too that the global focus was actually on getting vaccines as soon as possible, and the anti-vaxxers were able to get their messaging out there, and they created some level of uncertainty, confusion among our people. But even prior to that, there are still a number of people who were hesitant about taking vaccinations. In fact, even routine care, our people generally have been complacent. Some of our people, for example, who have NCDs, they do not take their medicines on a regular basis, and they do the things that they're not supposed to do. There are people, for example, who may have uncontrolled diabetes, and they will tell you that they can't do without the ice cream and all the bread and so on. And so it's partially cultural. I mean, the other thing about it too is that a lot of our citizens and residents, they do not like going to doctors. They prefer to stay at home and to use these home remedies. But clearly, home remedies do not work with COVID. I mean, they may help the symptoms and may provide some temporary relief, but ultimately, in terms of curing COVID, they do not work. And you find that a lot of the deaths that would have occurred as well, if our people were a little more vigilant and would have sought, medical assistance sooner, perhaps they would have survived. But many of them, they wait until when they practically cannot breathe before they find themselves, at the hospital. And again, it is cultural. I mean, we have been very complacent with our health, and it is something that we have to address, obviously through public education and awareness. And for our case, where we see the issue of vaccinations, the unvaccinated is not really a homogeneous group. Now, we do accept that some individuals, they may be hesitant. We do accept that. Some individuals may not have enough information, and you can use public awareness and persuasion to get those individuals to make the decision to get vaccinated. But there are also some who are just resistance without reason. Some are just defiant. And this is where the mandates are very helpful to deal with those who are defiant in order to get them vaccinated, because, we are safe as the most vulnerable individual. So if we don't achieve herd immunity and we have a large cadre of our population unvaccinated, then all of us will be at risk, even the vaccinated. And, vaccination mandates are not to punish anyone. They really are a call to duty to mobilize the population to get vaccinated, because, we have this invisible enemy that we all are fighting. And the science would have proven that it requires at least 80% of the population getting vaccinated in order to effectively fight this virus. And if that is the ultimate solution, then we all have an obligation to play our part and to contribute towards defeating this virus.
So you said mandates are helpful, and my ears perk up, and some people may not agree with you. So what we'll do at this time, Mr. Prime Minister, you were passionately speaking on this matter in Parliament. Let's revisit that insert and we'll continue the discussion.
Just yesterday, my cabinet took a decision that all public servants must get vaccinated or get tested at least twice monthly. Otherwise, you will not be eligible to enter into the workplace. And if you don't come to work, you cannot justify getting paid. And if you don't come to work after a period of time and you abandon your job, you lose your employment. Yes. We are a Labour Party organization. We're not seeking to threaten people's jobs, but we have a problem.
So, Mr. Prime Minister, some people may say that you are infringing on their rights. What do you say in answer to people who are saying, you're forcing me to do this? As my constitutional right, you can't make me do this.
Well, we would have had legal advice from a number of constitutional experts, from a number of legal luminaries within the Caribbean, and even extra-regionally. Among the legal luminaries within the region would have had Professor Antoine at UE, as well as the former president of CCJ, Mr. Dennis Byron, who would have advised us, that those constitutional breaches that people speak about, that they do not apply. In fact, the Constitution is very clear. There are certain, abrogations in terms of certain rights, especially when it comes to public health and protecting the wider public. Now, in Antigua and Barbuda, the central government and statutory organizations combined, they employ about 13,000 people. So as an employer, we have an obligation in law to provide a safe working environment for all employees. And we felt too that we had to be careful that, not we found negligent in terms of providing a safe environment and potentially could be sued. But above and beyond that, we have an obligation to provide a safe working environment for all. And recognizing that COVID is a significant threat to the health of employees, we had to act to protect the health of all employees. Now, initially, our policy was based on, getting vaccinated or testing twice monthly. But based on the amount of individuals who would have had to test twice monthly, and considering that we have about 13,000 people employed, we would not have had the human capacity to provide testing, and that is why we had to eliminate that option. So as it stands now, each public servant is required to be vaccinated, and the only how we'll accept testing is if they are exempt for religious or medical reasons, then they'll have to test twice monthly. But outside of that, we have mandated that public servants, avail themselves of the vaccines, that they should be vaccinated in order to enter the workplace. And that is a measure that was designed primarily to keep the work environment safe for all workers. And that is a primary obligation of the government as an employer. We also took the decision to that certain public spaces, which are in the control of the government of Antigua and Barbuda, that we also had an obligation to keep those spaces pristine, to keep them COVID-free, or at least to reduce the risk of the transmission of COVID by ensuring that our people are vaccinated.
So what has been the response since the government has issued that ultimatum that you get vaccinated or else?
Well, as I said before, people look at mandates in a very negative way. But again, we see the mandates as a call to duty, to step up, to get vaccinated, to fight this invisible enemy. And, after the initial noise and the threats and the legal action that was taken by the trade unions, I'd say that Antiguans and Barbudans have actually risen to the call of duty. And they have gone out in their jaws to get vaccinated, to the extent we have actually we actually ran out of AstraZeneca vaccines and Pfizer vaccines, which are the two top vaccines at this time. We just had to get 5,000 AstraZeneca vaccines from St. Vincent and Grenadines, and we're now in the market for some Pfizer. We're hoping that maybe within the next couple of weeks, we'll get our second tranche from the United States. But in the meantime, we're trying to get a bridging amount of maybe about 10,000 Pfizer vaccines, because we have an average about 1,000 people a day who have gone out to get vaccinated since we introduced the mandates. Prior to that, we're struggling to get 100 individuals daily. So the vaccination process would have come to a screeching halt. But then when we looked at the whole situation involving the hospitalizations and deaths, as well as the fact too that, our economy would have taken a beating for the last 19 months. And the economy cannot sustain any more wounds. We have to try and resolve the COVID issue and try and return to normalcy as soon as practicable. And the only way we could return to normalcy is by getting our people inoculated, pushing towards achieving herd immunity for the end of the year. So I would say that if the current trajectory continues, we should reach herd immunity hopefully by sometime in December. And we hope to, remove the restrictions, maybe barring the wearing of masks, if COVID still remains a significant global threat. But already we have started to reduce some of the restrictions. So we have shortened the curfew hours. And we have allowed for, patrons to patronize restaurants and so on, to have indoor dining, provided they're vaccinated, to patronize the cinemas, again, provided they're vaccinated. So we also incentivizing the vaccinated persons by allowing them, some leverage to attend various establishments. But we hope to literally eliminate most of the restrictions by the end of the year. We want to return to normalcy as soon as possible, and obviously to recover our economy in 2022. I mean, there's no way that as a small island with very limited resources, we could sustain yet another year of economic wounds. I mean, in that case, the recovery will be protracted and the socioeconomic fallout could last for at least a decade. So it's in our interest to try and reach herd immunity as soon as possible in order to recover our country's economy.
You mentioned having 13,000 public servants. So if 9,000 of those public servants show up with an exemption on religious grounds, what happens? And also, aren't you worried, Mr. Prime Minister, that while you're trying to get the hospitality service, let's say, back up, you can face the flip side, where someone might say, well, I'm not bound to eat at a restaurant, and the restaurateurs, the owners of hospitality business, may then say the government is not helping us because people are staying away because they don't want to have to present a vaccination record.
Yeah, well, about 70% of the 80% that we need to achieve to get to herd immunity vaccinated, and about 60% are fully vaccinated. So we do have a large cadre of persons who are, fully vaccinated or would have had their first dose. So we get in there, and based on the amount of individuals who would have had at least their first vaccination, I can see us getting to probably about 70% of the total population within the next 30 days. So if provided, the momentum continues. And unfortunately, we may see some reduction because of the unavailability of some of the vaccine types at this time. But we hope that within the next week or two, when we get in some additional Pfizer vaccines, that we should be able to see a continued momentum. So in that case, when you have so many people vaccinated, there should not be any significant reduction in business for restaurants and so on. And I believe, though, that those operators too, they would want to ensure that they're operating within a safe environment, for their owners, certainly for their staff members. Ultimately, it's about safety. It's about protecting lives and livelihoods. And we have had this carve out, so at least they can trade and they'll be able to sustain themselves and at the same time, protect lives and livelihood.
So, Mr. Prime Minister, the question begs, you have taken a stance which has proven not to be popular in a lot of Caribbean islands. Aren't you worried that probably you'll lose popularity and probably lose out on being re-elected?
Well, I would have said to my cabinet colleagues prior to making a decision, and even to the country, that we cannot put our political prospects ahead of the health and well-being of the people of the country. And I would rather, be an ordinary citizen of a successful country than to be prime minister of a failed state. So if we did not move with alacrity to introduce those mandates and to accelerate the vaccination process, then we will continue to see the economic decline, unemployment will continue to rise, and more people would die. Now, I don't know that we can put our political prospects above the national interests. I think it was the correct thing to do, to put the people first, put the health and well-being of the people of Antigua and Barbuda first. And as far as I'm concerned, the issue of being re-elected, that is secondary. What is important now is for us to provide leadership for the people of Antigua and Barbuda. And I'll say here too, that the introduction of vaccine mandates represent a form of leadership, especially for those who are defiant. I mean, they're not going to go on their own volition. And, you have to put mechanisms in place to get them vaccinated. And as I said to people, the means justify the end. And the end here is to achieve herd immunity or national immunity as soon as possible in the interest of all.
You mentioned defiance, and that's a word that has been used in Grenada between the months of July and now. And you mentioned Grenada while you were speaking in the Antiguan Parliament. Let's revisit that insert, and we'll continue the discussion, Mr. Prime Minister.
Grenada, which prior to 3 weeks ago, colleagues, had they have 85 deaths now. Just gallop past Antigua and Barbuda in a matter of what? 3 weeks. 85 deaths. In fact, the rate of deaths literally overwhelming the system in Grenada. They're now storing bodies in refrigerated containers. What else do we need to see or to hear, to experience in order to come to the realization that vaccination is the only way out of this problem?
And we also want to go, before we continue the discussion, Mr. Prime Minister, to another insert where you address the issue of the approach taken by the police in Antigua as compared to the approach taken by the police in Grenada. So we'll look at that and then we'll come back.
I said to the nation that I stood 100% with the police. Now you juxtapose that to what happened in Grenada. Because I heard people criticizing us, saying, oh, it's a totalitarian state. Look how the police dealt with the people in Antigua. But in the case of Grenada, they allowed the jab to continue and they exercised discretion. Discretion to spread COVID. Look what happened now. If the police in Grenada had stood up, perhaps their fortunes would have been different today. And I want to commend law enforcement. And I say to you all, when they break the law, enforce the law.
Mr. Prime Minister, that was about 3 weeks ago when you made those comments. Mr. Prime Minister, I leave you to answer to that. Some Grenadians are not very pleased with you.
What specifically you would like me to say? Or to
are you standing by that, or are you withdrawing those statements? Some people are accusing you of meddling in Grenada's internal affairs.
Well, it's unfortunate that they would have seen it in that way. You have a situation here in Antigua and Barbuda in which our political opponents were using the approach of the police in Grenada to suggest that law enforcement here acted inappropriately in breaking up an illegal gathering which we were trying to march. And I responded accordingly. Now, let me state here that the subject there was not necessarily the police in Grenada and the action. I mean, that was, literally a collateral issue. That was not the main issue. The main issue was about the action of our police, and we believe that they acted appropriately.
So you're saying that Grenada police became collateral damage?
I just want to make it abundantly clear that the statement was not made with any malice. So there was no malicious intent. So let me make that abundantly clear.
Okay, but truly, Mr. Prime Minister, you are human, and the argument in Grenada, some of the people who got involved in those illicit activities were saying, well, we have been cooped up, people are suffering from cabin fever, and people needed to free up themselves. In the months prior, we heard government officials saying that we have to consider lives and livelihoods, people need to get on with their lives. How do you balance the two?
Well, as you rightfully indicated, I should not get involved in the affairs of Grenada. So that's a matter for the government people of Grenada in terms of how they balance the issue there. Again, my comment was specific to, certain accusations that were made by our political opponents here, but was not intended to be any form of, political interference in the affairs of Grenada. What I can say, though, is that the issue of, the psychological impact of COVID and so on, and as you said, people wanted to get out. I mean, that's an issue all over. We've had to face that issue here, too. But at the end of the day, for individuals to act illegally, to be involved in any illegal gathering and to spread COVID inadvertently, that is just unacceptable. In fact, as a result of that gathering that the police had to break up, over 9 police officers ended up with COVID. So you can imagine if they had the opportunity to really proceed with their march, exactly what would happen in terms of the spread of COVID. So the police did what they had to do in order to protect the public interest. And my statement was about standing with the Antigua and Barbuda police. And obviously, I responded to political opponents who used, the decision of the police in Grenada. And again, as I said, it was not a malicious statement, so no one should really be offended. At the end of the day, we are all one family. We are all Caribbeaners, and I have a respect for the government and people of Grenada. In fact, my dear friend Keith Mitchell, a very good friend. We actually participated in a conference up to today, and we have very good relations. So I just want to reinforce the point here that there's absolutely no malice in that statement. That was specifically for those who were literally trying to undermine the efforts of our law enforcement here in Antigua and Barbuda when they intervened to protect the interests of the public.
And we have excerpts of that incident and a couple of things here. Are you not worried about optics, Mr. Prime Minister? Because we'd see tear gas being used against protesters in Europe, in France, let's just say. Sometimes you hardly even see it in the US, maybe. You're not worried about the optics?
Well, first of all, I didn't give any instructions for the police to use tear gas. In fact, I was not even on island. I found out about that issue after the fact. Not that I'm trying to extricate myself, but from all indications, the police tried to stop the march, and they insisted. They were warned on numerous occasions. And the only measure that the police had available to disperse the crowd was to use tear gas. Now, tear gas is more like a nuisance in the sense that it will burn the eyes and nose and so on, but it doesn't create any structural problem for anyone. And no one got seriously hurt. But at the same time, they were able to disperse that illegal crowd in the interest of public safety. So it's not about optics. I mean, when people are trying to get involved in illegal marches and to put the entire population at risk. I mean, this is not a situation, normal circumstances, we don't have a deadly infectious disease around. If it was a normal situation without COVID or, any other such infectious disease, and the police could have taken that kind of action, one could have concluded that maybe they would have used excessive force. But in the circumstances of COVID, especially with the Delta strain and the type of spread that we have seen, I felt that it was quite appropriate for them to disperse the crowd, and the crowd was defiant, so they gave them no other option. And now we don't have water cannons here as an option, and those two can be very dangerous. The only measure of crowd control that is available to the police, having exhausted all the other options, was to use the tear gas to have them disperse.
So, Mr. Prime Minister, what do you say to your colleagues across the Caribbean who seem to be caught between a rock and a hard place, the devil and the deep blue sea? They need to address this matter, but yet they're looking at political expedience. What will this cost me politically? What message would you like to send to these leaders this evening?
Well, I mean, I don't have any message for any leader. I mean, ultimately, these leaders, most of them are more experienced than I am. And they will know precisely what to do. They know exactly the population that they're dealing with and how to protect and promote the best interests of their people. What I will say, generally speaking, is that vaccine mandates are inescapable. Unless our people change their behavior and they decide to cooperate and volunteer to get vaccinated, if they remain hesitant and defiant or resistant, then vaccine mandates are the only way. That's how I see it. But I'm not telling any leader, advising any leader to take any such decision. Ultimately, I respect decision of all heads and certainly all countries. They're sovereign countries, and they take decisions in their best interests. We have acted, and our mandates are working, and we're quite happy with the decision that we've taken.
You are very happy with the decision that you have taken. Mr. Prime Minister, we need to take a commercial break, and when we come back, we will open the phone lines. Peradventure, members of the Canadian public would like to have a convo with you, get a point across, so we let our listeners and viewers know the number you can call, 440-1252, 440-1252. We have a one-on-one this evening with Antigua and Barbuda's Prime Minister, the Honorable Gaston Browne. We also want to ask him about LIAT and the recent sale of Scotiabank. Stay with us, please.
disaster or emergency may disrupt food and water supply, so have at least a 3-day supply of food on hand. Store foods that have long storage life, need little or no cooking or refrigeration. Store canned or ready-to-eat foods, 100% canned fruit juices, nuts, crackers, dried herbs, and spices. A message from the Grenada Food and Nutrition Council in collaboration with the Ministry of Health with support from the Pan American Health Organization.
Are you looking for quality herbs and herbal supplements, or are you thinking about having a complete body cleanse to jumpstart your health? Then no need to look further. Visit Nirvana Natural Health Clinic, Detox Center, and Natural Health Store. We carry a wide range of herbal products for kidney and gallstone cleansing, male sexual enhancement formulas, asthma and sinusitis, gas and bloating, acid reflux, constipation, arthritis, imbalanced hormones, female health issues, liver cleansing, weight loss, and so much more. Also available, colonic irrigation, holistic health consultations, essential oils, and diffusers. Look out for our online natural health store coming soon. Call 231-6642 for 18-7115 or 449-7753 to find out about our delivery options or to book an appointment. Visit us at Belmont St. George's, close to the Fallage, Monday to Saturday, 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. Nirvana Natural Health Clinic. Detox your way to health.
The croton scale insect, a new threat to our agricultural production, is now creating major damage to several plants. Mango, soursop, plums, guava, avocado, and crotons are among the main ones affected. Excessive sooty mold, black blight, is associated with this pest. Take action now. Cut and burn infested fruits and shoots. Do not move infested materials to other areas. Treat with horticultural oils and recommended insecticides. Request assistance from the Ministry of Agriculture. Follow all safety protocols when burning trash or applying pesticides. A message from the Ministry of Agriculture.
Just a reminder, the global pandemic is not over. Office Pros and markers are still here to protect you. Available are several versions of touchless hand sanitizer and hand soap dispensers, dispenser stands, paper towel and toilet paper dispensers, and thermometers. Also available, hand sanitizing gel, sanitizing solution, hand soap, Lysol products, face masks, and gloves, all offered at the best price on the market and backed by a full warranty and protection plan with free installation. We are located on the Woodlands Main Road. Call Office Pros on 444-2393 or markers on 439-2393. You can also visit the Facebook page for more information. And never forget to remember, I, Mr. Markers, would never forsake you. Believe that.
Dear customer, please help us limit the potential impact of COVID-19. If you have cold, flu, or COVID-19 symptoms, please postpone your visit to Grenlec. We recommend using online banking to make payments, available through Co-op Bank, Republic Bank, and FCIB. You can also use check drop boxes at each of our locations. For bill balances and other information, call 237. For additional support, email customersupport@grenlec.com.
World Food Day 2021. The virtual event showcases our food heroes, modern technologies in agriculture, and ingenuity of agro-processors. Celebrate with us our achievement, creativity, and explore the many opportunities in the sector. Be entertained by the best of our cultural extravagance. Join us October the 15th via Zoom, GIS, and Real FM. Visit the Ministry of Agriculture's Facebook page for more information.
Total is one of the world's largest oil companies with a top quality line of lubricants. Total Lubricants has a full product line from passenger cars, motorcycle, heavy industrial equipment, mining, trucking, agriculture, and manufacturing machines and vehicles. Total Lubricants, winning championships in motorsports, including Formula One and World Rally Championships. Total Lubricants are available at all Rubis service stations, leading automotive shops, and distributed by Huggins.
And welcome back to Beyond the Headlines. This evening we have a one-on-one engagement with the Prime Minister of Antigua and Barbuda, the Honorable Gaston Alfonso Browne. Mr. Prime Minister, we have somebody who wants to through a question that you have been waiting during the commercial break, so we go straight to the phone line at this time. Caller, good evening. Caller, are you hearing us?
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, go right ahead.
Prime Minister Browne, good evening and welcome to Grenada, even though you are only here with us virtually.
He's hearing you. Go ahead.
Mr. Browne, you just said the host asked you about using tear gas on your fellow citizens, and you said, and she said, how does it, the optics? She described it as the optics of it. And you responded that you were out of country, but that you fully supported the action of your police. I am wondering whether, if the protesters wore masks, for example, because you seem to be saying that the use of tear gas was required because of the COVID-19 pandemic. That is, you probably thought tear gas was a good idea so that your police would not have to come in close contact with the protesters. So my, again, very brief question, and I want to ask you, if they wore masks in the defiant protest, what would have been the response, a more appropriate response, you think? Rubber bullets, maybe? And I have a short, and the other question, because that's one, and the second thing is, don't you think that citizens have a right to protest, whether there's a pandemic or not, that they have a right to protest without the police using tear gas, which you describe in very benign ways? And it's really a first. I've never heard a Caribbean leader describe, or any leader describe tear gas as something as benign. You said there was no damage to infrastructure. But you do know, you must know that tear gas has been known to cause severe respiratory problems.
Caller, thank you so much for that. And let's give the Prime Minister an opportunity to respond to your questions. Mr. Prime Minister?
Right. So the protesters, they were protesting the wearing of masks. Many of them had no masks. And the laws or the protocols, as enshrined in regulations here, require individuals to wear a mask when outdoors. They also were protesting social distancing, and they were protesting the vaccines as well. So again, a number of them did not have their mask on. Actually, there are at least two individuals who attended that ill-fated march who eventually died, two young individuals. One was 25 years of age, and the other was, I believe, in his early 30s. And those two individuals ostensibly got the virus at that gathering, and they died a few weeks later. So again, they would have put the police at risk, of course, if the police did not disperse the crowd. And I maintain that no one was hurt, that yes, tear gas does burn the nose, the eyes, and so on, but there's no evidence that anyone would have gotten seriously hurt. What I can say is that if that illegal march was allowed to continue, the spread of COVID would have been far more significant and more people would have died. So again, it is in the context of protecting the overall population from the spread of a deadly disease. I would have agreed with that caller if ordinarily that, it was on in normal circumstances and they were seeking to illegally, and And by the way, we do support protestations. It's part of our democracy. Yes, they have a right to protest, but they do not have a right to protest illegally, and especially in the context of spreading COVID and hurting other innocent people.
So, Mr. Prime Minister, I want to revisit two issues there. Number one, the organization said that the government played games with them because you waited, and I say you, university, the government waited final hour Friday to tell them no, they could not hold the protest. We have another call on the line, but I also want to ask you, you mentioned earlier that there were a certain number of police officers who contracted COVID-19 at that protest, and you also mentioned just now that 2 of the people contracted COVID-19 at that event. How do you know for sure that is so? But I would want to put my question on ice.
Notice I use the word ostensibly. I mean, that is the exposure that we know that they had. So you are right. You can never tell precisely where someone ever contracted COVID, but we have an indication that that is where they got it. Now, on the issue of playing games, I mean, no one was playing games with them. In fact, the commissioner went as far as even speaking to the attorney of the group and spoke to individuals, influential individuals in the society to speak with them. Even the Sunday morning before they started to protest, the commissioner intervened again, and they were just lawless.
Okay, let's go to the phone line. Sometimes some people are on cell phones and we don't want them to use up too much of their credit. Caller, good evening. Hello? Hello, caller, are you there? Okay, so we seem to have, let's try one last time. Is the caller there, producer? Okay, so that call has dropped off. Yes, Mr. Prime Minister, you were saying, okay, so the caller is back. Caller, good evening.
Hi, good afternoon.
Yes, please.
I would just like to ask a question based on a piece of the clip that played a while ago concerning persons in Grenada, the extent of deaths in Grenada, and then he was alluding to the fact that bodies were stored in containers. And I'm kind of drawn back because I'm living in Grenada and logging on to the news from time to time, listening all the news, and I'm not aware of where using this container that they're referring to. So I want to know what facts he have to substantiate his statement saying that they have so much deaths in Grenada that bodies are being stored in container. I find it was a misleading comment. And he's sitting here now saying that the comments that was made was not meant to make anybody look away or anything like that, was just to make a point. But anybody listening to it and any Grenadian would see for a fact the statements that was made was damaging on the international market.
Thank you so much, caller, for that. Mr. Prime Minister, you want to respond to that, or? Well,
again, as I indicated, there was no malicious intent. In fact, we also have a refrigerated container here as well to store bodies. So that is just the situation with COVID, based on the similar here in Antigua and Barbuda, in which we also have a refrigerated container as well, potentially to store bodies, because at one point the funeral homes here were actually filled with bodies, and that is the reality that we're faced with.
And just to add that, yes, Mr. Prime Minister, we had representatives of funeral agencies who explained the need for the refrigerated containers in Grenada. So you acted on the correct premise. We have another caller on the line. Caller, good evening.
Hi, good night. How are you? Yes.
I'm well, thanks.
Good night, Mr. Prime Minister. How are you, sir? Yes.
I'm fine, thanks.
In concerns of the situation where it had to do with Grenada, there's a statistic here that a lot of people kind of decided to overlook. I've realized that our government has probably been playing a bit of a game with the precedence of things that's happening. When it came to Grenada, the situation with the cases, we have to realize that our government decided to open our borders from the period of July into August. Prior to that, there were no cases within the island. There was no deaths. There was nothing under that situation. You understand? And our government decided to give the provisions to persons who were vaccinated and have events, along with persons who are coming from the United States, Britain, all over the world, and coming into our islands at a period of time. As we would have heard from the U.S. government, was given mandates that, we did not have to wear any, persons who were vaccinated didn't have to wear any mask. A few months later, we got to find out that persons were advised to put on masks again because persons who are vaccinated were able to pass on these the virus to persons. You understand? So this was a total development situation, and I believe that this situation festered from vaccinated persons who were coming into the island. You understand? And so we have to realize that we cannot decide that, okay, jab was just a ending factor or an easy way out of the situation. I mean, I understand your approach, and you are trying to do the best job as possible in terms of, getting your island vaccinated and stuff like that. But I believe that this is more of a psychological situation. We have to watch our approach in terms of how we're trying to get our nation or the Caribbean nation in order to make people understand. Just think about it. When we were getting vaccinated, people were vaccinated as kids. We were never there was never part in the human nature where adults were having mass vaccinations like this.
Okay, caller, thank you so much for that, Mr. Prime Minister.
Well, I note the intervention, and that person evidently has his own ideas in terms of how the spread occurred in Grenada, and all I can do at this point is just to respect his opinion.
Opinion well respected. So, Mr. Prime Minister, let's move on. Peradventure, we get another caller dealing with this issue. We'll go back to the phone lines. So you are the chairman of CARICOM. You have been on the board of LIAT 1974 Limited. LIAT is headquartered in Barbados. It was struggling, and then COVID seemed to have put the final nail in the coffin. What can you say to Grenada, the rest of the Caribbean, and people? Because they're coming from overseas, sometimes they make connections via LIAT. What's the status of LIAT at this time?
Well, LIAT is operating. It has less aircraft. It actually has 3 aircraft currently, and it has been operating, obviously, on a limited schedule. The demand for air travel is still very weak at this time. But however, it's providing a service. So LIAT is still alive, obviously not in the best of health. And it would appear that at some point we will have to commence a new LIAT, probably a LIAT 2020, LIAT 2021, and, collapse the old LIAT. But at the end of the day, we need sustainable air transportation in order to ensure reliable connectivity within the Caribbean region. And I'm of the view that LIAT could be salvaged. In fact, we would have proven so, because during the months of July and August, LIAT literally operating one plane at a time would have turned a profit an operational profit. And it has over 100 individuals employed throughout the region. And they're able to make enough money to pay the employees and to turn a profit, an operational profit. Now, the problem with LIAT over the years would have been a legacy problem. We saw COVID more as an opportunity and not necessarily, as a threat to LIAT, in the sense that, to right-size LIAT prior to COVID would have been a very difficult proposition, especially in light of the hostility of the unions. But COVID presented an opportunity to right-size it, and I think that many individuals would have missed that particular opportunity. And I believe that between a combination of public and private investment, that we can definitely restructure LIAT, create a new LIAT, and a LIAT that will be sustainable, one that will provide activity for the Caribbean people, and at the same time, one that will be self-sustaining.
So several workers in Grenada and some of the other islands have been stranded as a result of what has happened with Liat post-COVID-19. We know that I think it was about 3 weeks ago, there was an offer to pay Liat workers 50% severance and to also do a land and bonds issue, but the unions have rejected that. Are you making any progress there?
Well, we met with the Pilot Association recently, a few days ago, and they were more amenable to striking a deal with the Antiguan government. But as we said to them, we have to get all the unions on board. I mean, legally, none of the shareholding governments, have any legal liability to the staff. I mean, as you know, the shareholding of the governments would have been limited to the extent of their shareholding. The Antiguan government, for example, would have pumped hundreds of millions of dollars in Liat over the years, and I will accept that would have had economic benefits, but at the end of the day, would have lost a few $100 million that we pumped into Liat over the decades. But in terms of any legal liability arising from the collapse of Liat, the governments do not have any such liability. And it is well known that Liat's assets are such that if you sell them on a piecemeal basis in liquidation, they may only get about 5% of their severance liabilities paid. So the Antiguan government is offering as much as 50%. I mean, that is an extremely, lucrative deal in the sense that it's a superior deal to liquidating 74 and selling off the assets on a piecemeal basis. Even the 3 planes that are owned by Liat, they're charged by the Caribbean Development Bank. And the loans that the governments are carrying, the value of those loans or the balance on those loans exceed the value of the planes. So there's no equity in order to pay a severance. So what is really required is full cooperation. You find that some union leaders, making unreasonable demands. They're making demands in which they have no legal basis so to do. And as I've said to the other unions, if they really think that they owe 100% of their severance and staff liabilities, go to court and prove it. If you can't prove it and the governments are giving you, a compassionate payment, take it and run. But you can't go and demand. And then I said to them, even in the case of Antigua and Barbuda, if we were liable based on our shareholding in Liat, we had a shareholding of about 35%. So it would have meant that the liability would have been 35%. The fact that we're offering 50%, as I said, it's just a very lucrative offer. And I don't know why the union leaders do not recognize that they don't have a legal leg on which to stand. They can't force the government to pay them anything. I mean, we're doing this on a compassionate basis. And if they take the 50% from Antigua and Barbuda, now the government chip in, then clearly they may get up to the 100%. But to ask the Antiguan government to pay 100%, I mean, that is neither morally equitable or legally equitable. I mean, and we're not going to increase our offer. Our offer stands at 50%, and we're just waiting for them to come to a consensus among themselves and to accept the offer.
So the 50% is in cash, and that is for all the Liat workers in the Caribbean?
Well, it's not in cash alone. I mean, we said that.
No, so that's why I wanted to go on to ask you then if the lands and bonds component also apply to the workers in Grenada, let's say.
Well, it does, and it depends on the size of the liability. So what will happen, for example, the landholding license and so on, we can always issue those and waive the fees. So if someone in Grenada, for example, is owed a few $100,000, they wouldn't get the full amount in cash. They get a combination of cash, bonds, and what was the other one? No, cash, bonds, and land. If it's a small amount, we may be able to pay the full amount in cash. In fact, what we had hoped to do was to raise about at least 25% of the $50 million and place it in an escrow account. So that will cover the cash component of the settlement. And, depending on the size of the liability, we determine whether or not the person gets the settlement in a combination of, cash, land, and bond. Or if they just get cash, or they get a combination of cash, land, and bond. That'd be the different permutations that we'll have to pursue based on the size of the liability.
Okay. And Mr. Prime Minister, we have a caller who's been extremely patient. I hope the person is still there. Let's go to the phone line. Caller, good evening. Hello? I get a signal.
Hi, good evening. Are you hearing me?
Yes, go right ahead. I'm hearing you. We're hearing you. Go ahead.
Yes, so good night, Mr. Prime Minister, and welcome to Grenada.
Any pleasure.
Right, yes. There one question. The Prime Minister mentioned mandating vaccination to all the public servants, and I find that quite interesting. So I would want to find out, now that you have mandated the workplace is actually sterile, meaning everybody there is safe, everybody in that workplace, in the public service, they are sterile, they are clean, they are protected. So I want you to consider three things, Mr. Prime Minister. One, before these people reach to work, aren't they coming out from homes and mingling with the unvaccinated? And after they come out from work, aren't they going back into the supermarkets, into the market, and riding the public transport with people that are unvaccinated? So in effect, what is it have you achieved by forcing these people in order to be fully vaccinated? First. Secondly, there's this narrow narrative that the only way to fight COVID is through vaccination. Where several countries now, Ecuador, Holland, Sweden, India, Japan, they are now using ivermectin, and it is showing a lot of progress in that field. Aren't you at least giving your workers, your fellow men and women, an alternative in order to consider something else rather than just the vaccine? And thirdly, what about the cost benefit? You have had public servants that work for 20 years, 30 years at the public servants. They have never taken a pill. They believe in herbs. They have never done anything else to add, not even, how you call it, nothing else, no pills in order to put into the body. So have you considered the cost benefit of asking somebody that just refused to take a vaccine, asking them to leave their job just because they failed to take a vaccine when these persons have been very loyal to the work and to the country for all these years? Are you comfortable seeing your workers leave the job after they have sacrificed so much for Antigua?
Thank you so much, caller, for that. Mr. Prime Minister, you have 3 questions on the table.
Right. So the issue about firing workers, we have not taken any decision to terminate anyone. We acted in our capacity as an employer that has a legal responsibility as enshrined in the Labor Code of Barbuda to provide a safe working environment for all employees. So on that basis, employees are required to get vaccinated. The science would have shown clearly that individuals who are vaccinated, they're unlikely, even though they could, they're unlikely, to contract the virus. And if they do spread the virus, they will not have the type of viral load that it will be a significant spreader of the virus. So we know that, and it's about managing risk, yeah? I mean, we know that vaccinated persons represent a significant lower level of risk compared to the unvaccinated. Now, in terms of the drugs that the gentleman spoke about, including ivermectin, to the best of our knowledge, I mean, that is not a very efficient drug to treat COVID. I mean, there are all sorts of claims that have been made. I remember some time ago too, hydrochloroquine was actually, touted as one of the drug that could be utilized to fight COVID as well. That has proven not to be so. Even Merck recently announced that they have this pill that can cure COVID. Again, it's still being tested. It has not been proved as yet. AstraZeneca would have announced too that they have a cocktail that is very effective, and they're now seeking approval. So the only safe way to manage COVID is through vaccinations. And again, as I said, we never took any decision to terminate anyone. Individuals have a right to protect their employment. We know that the vaccinations or the vaccines, they are safe and they are efficacious. And what we're trying to do here is to protect lives and livelihoods. And, as COVID continues to spread throughout the Caribbean region, the possibility of individuals getting infected with COVID unvaccinated, that probability increases. And as that probability increases, it means that we'll have more hospitalizations and deaths. And, I don't see how governments could reasonably sit back and allow hundreds of people to die without intervening. I mean, the other way to address this issue is allow everybody to get natural immunity. But how many people would die if we were to take, that decision, and it will actually collapse the health system. So we have to be very pragmatic about these issues. People allow emotions to get into their decision making. We have to look at the options that are available, take the safest option and the one that we can sustain. I mean, I know we can sustain a situation in which we just forget about vaccinations and allow people to contract, let's say thousands of people to contract COVID and to get sick and then die of COVID. I mean, how are we going to treat those individuals? And what about the impact on our society? What about the impact on productivity? The interesting thing about it, India with about 1.3 billion people, they would have vaccinated 1 billion people, 1 billion with the 1.3 billion. In the developed countries where they have far more resources, far more human resources, far more financial resources, they have 70-80% of their populations vaccinated. And these little 2x3 countries here in the Caribbean, we think they have the luxury of just putting hundreds of people out to die. I mean, come on. I mean, we have to protect our people. We have to protect lives as a priority and to protect livelihoods. And the best way, the safest way, is through vaccinations.
Mr. Prime Minister, for taking those 3 points. There's a report that we want to consider, but I understand that we've got a caller on the line. Caller, good evening.
Yes, good evening. Greetings to you and to your guest. Question. In effect, well, should I say short comment and question? In effect, the majority of the Caribbean islands have been using tourism as the major pillar of the economies. Based on the fact that COVID has proven to us how, should I say, fickle that industry is. Question. Does Mr. Browne believe that the Caribbean islands should continue with tourism being the principal pillar of the economies, or does he believe that we should make some variation, in other words, strengthen other aspects for the development of our country while we use tourism as a sort of side component of it? Thank you very much. Mr. Browne, one more thing. Be careful with would have plus the past participle.
Thank you so much, caller, for that. Mr. Browne is not here for a language lesson this evening. Mr. Browne, you want to comment on tourism?
Yeah, well, I do not necessarily accept the analysis of the caller. Tourism is easily one of the most resilient sectors that we have. I mean, it is true that, from time to time, there'll be disruptions, but there's no doubt that our tourism will bounce back bigger and better. In fact, 2022, unless we have a fundamental problem with COVID, will be a strong revenue year from tourism because there'll be pent-up demand. And I do not know that there's any other sector, any of the OECS economies that can replace tourism at this point. So tourism will continue to be the driver of our economies within the foreseeable future. But I accept, however, that there's a need for diversification. But diversification takes time, and we will. That is all of us. We're committed to diversifying our economies. ICTs. Using information technology. I mean, many of us would have entered into the cannabis space, into blockchain technology, cryptocurrencies, as well as stem cells therapy. I mean, those are things that are happening here in Antigua and Barbuda as we seek to diversify our economy. And we also diversifying our tourism product. So you find now that we're going for more high-end tourism product because we want to increase the visitor spend and to increase revenues. I mean, truth be told, the pay that we're seeing in the hotel sector now for those all-inclusives, I mean, the pay generally is unacceptable. And if our people are going to command good salaries and wages so they can live properly, eat healthily and have a good life, then, we need a high-end tourism product to increase salaries and wages. And I do accept, though, that we will need some of those let's say, all-inclusive to fill the back of the plane, but we need a better diversified tourism product, especially insofar as attracting more high-end tourists to our respective countries in order to increase the spend.
Great. We have a call on the line. Caller, good evening.
Good evening. I want to applaud the Prime Minister for his strong sense of supporting his people. But on a lighter side, I just want to know, is he broadcasting from his bedroom? That background picture looks like it's from a bedroom area. So that's all I wanted to say.
That's my little son bedroom. Don't worry about it. We keep it basic around here. Don't worry about it. I use my son's computer in his bedroom.
Mr. Prime Minister, that's a good point for us to segue into the report coming out of Antigua over the restrictions being implemented. So let's do that and we continue and get ready to wrap up tonight's discussion.
We cannot justify keeping our country's economy partially closed and limping into 2022 and perhaps having another 19 months of disruption. And as I said over a year ago, probably about 18 months ago, we have to learn to live and work with COVID.
Prime Minister Honorable Gaston Browne speaking on his weekly radio program. Earlier this month, the government announced its intentions to drop all COVID-19 restrictions by the end of the year. Achieving herd immunity against the virus, however, is crucial in plans to ease restrictions.
COVID is not going away anytime soon. Now, as we eliminate restrictions, the unvaccinated will become more susceptible to contracting the virus.
The Prime Minister warns there is a possibility COVID-19 related hospitalizations and deaths will continue. To mitigate this, the government is looking towards shoring up its healthcare capacity.
We'll be also hiring potentially more doctors and nurses. I don't know where we're getting them from. We may have to look to Cuba, possibly India. And we may have to look to retired nurses as well.
Efforts are also underway to source additional personal protective equipment or PPE, as well as COVID-19 testing apparatus. Meanwhile, Prime Minister Browne is also responding to concerns about the easing of some restrictions later this week, with active cases just under 1,000. The nation's leader says the mental toll the ongoing COVID-19 restrictions have had on the population contributed to the decision.
People are becoming genuinely frustrated with the measures or the restrictions. That's been 19 months now. And the question is, how much can they take?
The Prime Minister calls it an approach of empathy, but urges members of the populace to show personal responsibility. Rakib Aparicio reporting for ABS News.
Personal responsibility. Mr. Prime Minister, as we get ready to wrap it up this evening, there's an issue we want to look at the Scotiabank issue, but first let's just put a cap on the COVID discussion by looking at the dashboards. Let's first look at the Antigua one and then we look at Grenada so we can put a cap there. So in Antigua you've had 93 deaths, you've had 3,750 confirmed cases, partially vaccinated people 10,030 and fully vaccinated people 44,405. So are you satisfied as it stands now with the level of fully vaccinated people? And if you take us back to 2 weeks ago, for instance, where did that number stand, the number of fully vaccinated people?
Just over 30,000. And as I said, we were having like 100 or less than 100 individuals daily showing up for vaccinations. So, we would have had probably about 10,000 people within a 2-week period. And I think that was really, a good push in the vaccination process as we seek to accelerate our march to achieving national immunity.
Okay, so you have 93 deaths. Let's look at the Grenada dashboard as of the 10th of October. And the Grenada dashboard, unfortunately, I'm missing my glasses this evening. I think, producer, we have how many deaths? 167? Right, so we've had 3 new deaths, and the cumulative number of deaths we have
180.
So, and then can we look at the number of the partially vaccinated? It's just 2.7%, fully vaccinated. All right. So, Mr. Prime Minister, 93 versus 180 deaths, Antigua, Grenada, and you're looking at the charts and you're thinking what?
Well, again, I do not necessarily wish to comment directly on the situation in Grenada, as the last thing I want is for any misapprehension of my attacking the Grenadian people. All I say here, in any community in which you have a lot of unvaccinated persons, it represents fertile ground for the spread of COVID. And, you're likely to see a significant amount of hospitalizations and death. The only way to mitigate this risk is through vaccinations. And all of us within the Caribbean, in terms of protecting our Caribbean civilization, have a responsibility to do what it is necessary to get our people vaccinated, be it through persuasion, to public education, or by introducing vaccine mandates.
Mr. Prime Minister, so we have a lot of comments on the social media feeds. I just think I need to read this one. Somebody's saying, just to commend the PM on his composure. I may not agree with everything he said, but his composure is very commendable. He's unbothered by the negative comments. And me too, I was taken aback by the bedroom, but he says we keep it basic around here. So, Mr. Prime Minister, so in the Grenadian context, I think I have a close-up view. So the fully vaccinated population, 27,513, partially vaccinated, 8,714. So Antigua seems to be way ahead. I think your number is at 40,000 and somebody. So that's what it looks like with the fully vaccinated population in Grenada, still at 27,000. So do you think we need to introduce some mandates, Mr. Prime Minister? I know you don't want to meddle in Grenada's internal affairs.
As I said to you before, that's a decision for the government and people of Grenada. You know what will work in Grenada. I can tell you that mandates are working in Antigua. And I want to commend the people of Antigua and Barbuda for accepting the mandates as a call to duty. We're in a war, and we need to conscript as many people as possible, at least the defined ones, to join the army to fight COVID and to defeat it.
Mr. Prime Minister, you use strong terms. Conscript.
Well, notice I said the defined ones. If they're not coming, what are you going to do?
Mr. Prime Minister, we had a Dominican guest who said, some people seem to think that you're going to get a Gestapo to just stop on the side of the road and inject people. So, conscript tonight is sending that terminology. You're not suggesting the engagement of the Gestapo, no?
Not at all, not at all, not at all.
All right, another comment here, Mr. Prime Minister of Antigua, is such a breath of fresh air after listening to some politicians who get arrogant when asked questions. So the commendations are coming in, Mr. Prime Minister. Somebody's saying, I'm calling, but I can't get through. Can you ask the Prime Minister why he believes the other Caribbean leaders do not seriously buy into full financial support of LIAT as the ultimate Caribbean carrier, which is long overdue and necessary?
Well, partially insularity. And sometimes so we have this culture of freeloading. We have the view that we should have a policy of shared burden, shared benefits. But unfortunately, with some of these regional institutions, some countries just looking for a free ride. Antigua and Barbuda has its problem too, in terms of let's say have had, and maybe still with one or two institutions. But we need to put some form of mechanism of perhaps automaticity of payments for these institutions to sustain them. Otherwise, we're going to find more and more of our regional institutions failing. We can't have a situation in which we continue to leave, a small cadre of countries to carry the burden of our institutions. And one of the institutions I want to flag that I think all countries should, scale up their efforts and to have some form of automaticity of payment is payment to University of the West Indies. It is such an important institution to our development that it should not have to continue the type of deficit financing model that it has had to pursue to educate our people. And that is a typical example in which we have a most important regional institution in which countries continue to carry a significant amount of arrears and, just not coughing up the money so that the university could breathe and really provide the type of services that it would love to. But having said that, I have to tell you that the leadership at MUI, headed by Professor Beckles, they have done an extraordinary job, because I have suspect that if it wasn't for their commitment, for their tenacity, we would have been in serious problem. But despite the fact that it's underfunded, we continue to continues to perform admirably, and as you know, it's now ranked within 1.5% of the top universities globally.
Great, and we have another caller who will take us just on the edge of closure. Caller, good evening.
Good evening, Mr. Prime Minister. Thank you for staying with us. As the chairman of CARICOM, do you think that the platform is merely a further stage for the persons who are in political power in their own country to even have a better and wider regional platform? Or should we not consider, Mr. Prime Minister, a CARICOM parliament in the sense that we can have participation of political entities, whether they are in opposition? Maybe we could have some kind of formula where persons, political organizations, political entities, political parties, and their representatives can use CARICOM so that it becomes less of a narrow corridor of political expression. Because as it is now, it's only the leaders of the country that get to participate at CARICOM. I'm thinking more of Brussels, you see?
All right. Thank you so much, caller, for that, Mr. Prime Minister.
Yeah, I endorse the aspect of having a CARICOM parliament. We have an OECS parliament, and that has worked very well, in which we invite members of the opposition to participate in debates. And I think that should be replicated within the wider CARICOM region. The issue, though, of the lack of participation in regional affairs, perhaps to parties in opposition need to be a little more assertive in following the regional issues and contributing. I mean, they have different media that they can utilize in order to get their message across. So even if they're not part of a formal CARICOM meeting, they should be following the various issues and to intervene or to respond accordingly. But many of them do not even follow the debates. It's only when they want some form of intervention by heads, especially for partisan purposes, that they would engage CARICOM. So perhaps culturally, opposition parties have not engaged very well on regional issues and contribute towards, the thinking and the development of programs to deal with regional challenges.
Great, Mr. Prime Minister. As we get ready to wrap it up quickly, what is the status of Scotiabank, the sale of Scotiabank? We know that there was a big issue, and you again in Parliament, out of Parliament, making pronouncements and proclamations. What's the latest with the Antigua end of the sale?
Right, so that was successful. The Antigua and Scotia branch, which had over $1 billion in assets, was actually sold to a local bank, the Eastern Caribbean Amalgamated Bank. And it was a very important decision for us. And just to give you a brief background, when we came to office in 2014, 7 years ago, my government had to deal with financial failure. We had to deal with banking failure as well as economic failure. The country had lost about 25% of its GDP, and we had 2 banks that collapsed. In fact, we still have a deposit bond that we had to issue. We had to issue a deposit bond of over $300 million for one of the failed banks, the ABI banking group. So we recognize that the financial sector in Antigua and Barbuda is in a very precarious position. Our banks are relatively small. I mean, unlike St. Kitts and St. Lucia, in which they have less banks and they have a couple of large national banks. In the case of Antigua and Barbuda, the banking assets were splintered among several local banks. So consolidation was very important. And we recognize too that, in today's dispensation, in which we're having consolidation of banks globally, that, a small bank is really an anachronism. And these small banks cannot engage corresponding banks in any serious way and to sustain corresponding banking relations. So it was important for us to scale up our domestic banks, and having or literally forcing Scotiabank to sell locally was very important. And I want to make the point here, generally speaking, for all Caribbeans to take into consideration that our economy is by design, they're extractive economies. We focus on foreign direct investments, and their profits are repatriated, and they do not stay in the country to fund, continued socioeconomic development. My government is of the view that we have to change that economic model, and we've been doing so. So you find, for example, that we have been acquiring a number of private sector entities. The sole petrol distribution facility in the island that was previously privately owned, we owned 51% of it up until recently. We actually divested 10% to local Antiguans and Barbudans. That's a company that generates about $10 million annually, of which we get about $3 million in a dividend check. Plus, we get another $4 million or 10 million EC or 10.8 million EC in taxes. So what will happen is that the dividends are further socialized and paid into the treasury to fund socioeconomic development. It's a model that works for us. We call it empowerment capitalism, in which we promote ownership, domestic ownership, through a combination of public-private sector partnerships. And we believe that, ultimately, ownership is empowerment. And if you're going to truly empower the people, we have to expand domestic ownership. And I believe that this applies to other Caribbean countries, and they want to look at the structure of the economies and to make the necessary interventions to retain more of the profits. I mean, when you retain those profits, it means that more opportunities are created, even for young professionals to manage these entities, and at the same time, more financial resources to fund future socioeconomic development.
Well said, Mr. Prime Minister, and thanks for taking the time to speak with us this evening. We thank you for staying the entire period with us. We know that you have a very busy schedule. You had a meeting up to 15 minutes prior to the start of this program, and we understand that your schedule, your diary is reading 6 o'clock in the morning, and you have a finance minister's meeting tomorrow. So we want to thank you sincerely for taking the time to journey with us on this and to go through the various issues, because you were the headline maker in Grenada for quite a while. And I think the way you have explained yourself, people have a great understanding of the various issues at play and the Antiguan government's perspective on matters. Now, as we wrap it up, you have the opportunity to say something to Grenada, Carriacou, Petite Martinique, and people across the world, because we are broadcasting on all platforms and people follow us globally wherever they are in the diaspora. So what are your closing words this evening for our audience?
Well, just to say thank you for accommodating me, and I thank everyone who intervened. Thank you for your questions and certainly your interventions. And just end by saying one love to the Grenadian people. At the end of the day, we're all Caribbeaners. We're all in the same storm, in the same boat. We have to work together in order to, let's say, sustain our Caribbean civilization. So again, thanks for having me, and one love.
One love. We'll get that Bob Marley song and I'll send it across the seas for you.
Blessings.
Thanks so much, Mr. Prime Minister, and blessings to you. And we want to say thank you to our viewers and listeners who have been following us on the World Wide Web, on K105, and on GBN Television, our Facebook page, and our social media, and the YouTube channel. Thank you so much to the entire production team here at the GBN. And we want to say a very special thank you to the officers at the Prime Minister's office in Antigua who assisted us in facilitating this. We have been speaking with Antigua and Barbuda's Prime Minister, Gaston Alfonso Browne. Mr. Prime Minister, we hope at some point when you get an opening again, you'll be able to join us so we can go through politics this time. Your wife is a fellow minister in your cabinet. I would want to know how that works.
Well, I can tell you how it works. She got the most votes in the last election, so I had no choice but to put her in the cabinet. Otherwise, I would have made her a backbencher.
We've just started a new program all by itself.
Absolutely. Thanks again. Much love.
Thank you so much, Mr. Prime Minister. So long for now, Odette Campbell. I'll see you again next week. It's good when you can have a laugh at the end of a program. Thanks again, everybody.